This meeting is now being recorded.
Great, so let's get started. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for participating in this month's new partner webinar, Evaluating Fuel Pathways to Prioritize and Scale Cleaner Options, a life cycle analysis of cooking fuel. And we are conducting this webinar in partnership with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. My name is Kavanaugh Livingston, and I am a Senior Associate for Partnerships at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. This webinar is part of a series that provides an introduction to the Alliance for new and current partners and an overview of our work, the benefits of partnership, highlights upcoming opportunities for partners, and features on specific tools, resources, or engagement activities. After a short introduction on the Alliance, I will then hand over the presentation to my colleague, Seema Patel of the Global Alliance, to help kick off one of the main presentation topics. We'll begin with a quick overview of the Alliance's mission. For those who are new to the Alliance, our objective is to create a thriving global market of clean cook stoves and fuels. This initiative was created in response to the persistent problem of household air pollution, which impacts 3 billion people who rely on solid fuel to cook their daily meals. This issue results in numerous impacts on human health, the environment and climate, local economies and livelihoods, and women and girls. The Alliance was launched in 2010 by a number of founding partners with a mission to address this multifaceted challenge. The Alliance's adoption goal of 100 million households by 2020 is now at the midpoint. We are ahead of our projections, reaching 53 million households with clean and/or efficient cook stoves and fuels. Our market-based approach is built on 3 core strategies. Through a consultative process with sector experts shortly after our launch and building upon lessons learned, the Alliance determined that a market-based approach was the most effective way to reach our 100 million adoption target. We conduct our mission through 3 core strategies: strengthening supply, enabling markets, and enhancing demand. The Alliance Secretariat, which is based in Washington, D.C., coordinates global activities with market managers present in our 8 focus countries, in which we go deep with targeted support for clean cooking and who serve our locally based partners in the country or region. We are also pleased to report that the Alliance has over 1,650 partners from a diverse range of sectors and fields who are actively working to support and grow the clean cooking sector. If you are not a registered partner, we encourage you to join at cleancookstoves.org/partners. What does it mean to be an Alliance partner, and how can you take advantage of some of these opportunities? The short answer is becoming a partner is the best way to stay informed of Alliance activities globally and in country. Benefits of partnership include assistance with resources and capacity development and networking, as well as enhanced visibility. If you have any further questions on partnership's benefits, please contact the Alliance. Finally, we would like to take this time to discuss some helpful Alliance resources. The Alliance, in collaboration with the International Center for Research on Women, ICRW, created a set of indicators, methodologies, and tools for measuring the diverse social and economic impacts of clean and efficient cook stoves and fuels initiatives. This social impact M&E framework allows clean cooking partners to measure the meaningful social and economic benefits they create for users, employees, and entrepreneurs in the sector. These benefits include save time and money, reduce drudgery, access to financial services and formal training, and increased empowerment and agency. You may access the guide through the resources page on the Alliance's website at cleancookstoves.org/resources. The Alliance is currently preparing to transition into Phase 3 of its 10-year market strategy. Partner feedback is a vital aspect of the Alliance's efforts to define Phase 3 and the vision for sector sustainability. As part of this transition, the Alliance invites partners to provide feedback on those strategies that they feel can help advance the sector and meet the Alliance's 100 by 2020 adoption goal. If you are interested in providing feedback, please send your answers to a list of questions found on cleancookstoves.org/partners to phase 3 at cleancookstoves.org. Thank you for your attention. I will now hand over the presentation to my colleague, Seema Patel.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to see such a good group of folks on the webinar. I'm excited to have you join. This has been a project that has been undertaken over quite some time, and we're pretty excited to be able to present the results to a pretty diverse group of stakeholders. So I'll quickly introduce myself. We're actually going to have a few presenters today, and I'll be kicking things off. My name is Seema Patel. I'm a Senior Associate for Schools at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. And my work is really revolving around putting a fuel lens on all of the work of the Global Alliance, as well as amplifying those efforts throughout the Clean Cook Stoves sector. So this is an effort that's very much focused on cooking fuel value chains and really understanding the different impacts and trade-offs of various fuel options. So just to give you a little bit of an agenda of what I'm going to be speaking about today, I'm going to be talking about the value of LCAs, or life cycle analyses or assessments. You can use either phrase. Then I'll be going into a little bit more detail about this specific project, an overview of the cooking fuel analysis project that we did in partnership with our group. I'll talk a little bit about how you can access the information and the results and how to utilize it for different stakeholder audiences and for your needs. And then I'll talk a little bit about key research gaps and results as a result of this project, and then a little bit about how we're going to be disseminating the results over the next year. So let's start out with just some basics. What is a life cycle assessment or life cycle analysis? It's essentially an inventory of the environmental effects that are caused by a product or process throughout all stages of its life cycle, or all steps of a life cycle process, starting from the extraction and harvesting of raw materials to the production of that product, to its transport to the production site and to retailer, as well as and in some cases, depending on how you put boundaries around a life cycle analysis, it can also include waste disposal. What it does is really take a very holistic approach to looking at the impacts of a product. So you'll often hear life cycle analysis also referred to as cradle to grave, or developing an environmental footprint, or an environmental profile, or a value chain assessment. What that's really trying to say is that it not only looks at the cumulative effects of a product or a process, but it also it takes an inventory of each step of making a certain product or going through a certain process, including the use of all materials and energy as inputs, as well as emissions to air, land, and water as outputs. So why did we undertake? What is really the value of using an LCA? So by having what an LCA does is really quantify a product's environmental impact. And by knowing the environmental impact at each step of the value chain, you can really identify the strong and weak points, or the positive and negative environmental impacts of a process product. And by knowing that information, it allows you to find opportunities for process and product improvement. So if you know where weak spots are, that allows you to further research and technology development to better improve those weak spots. What it also does is allow you the ability to compare and analyze several processes and products based on the environmental impact, as well as better understand the trade-off of different options. So, for example, better understanding the options of paper versus plastic. Common debate in the U.S. for many years, whether or not one was more environmentally friendly than another. So it allows you to compare different products to determine which one has the least or more environmental. What it also does is gives you the ability to quantitatively justify a change in a process or product. So, for example, utilization of different inputs into a coal-fired plant or displacing it with the use of natural gas, and what effect that might have on the business and the processes overall from an environment. So it gives you the ability to make a lot of different decisions, but have it done in a more robust, comprehensive way. So what does this matter to the cook stove sector? So in the cook stove sector, we're often testing cook stoves for emissions and efficiency at the point of use in a range of different stove technologies, because we want to know better how to evaluate the potential impacts on health, environment, and livelihood. A lot of the things that we as a sector really value in fire. But what a life cycle analysis does is that it also gives you the ability to look at other impacts at each phase of making the cooking. So the full environmental life cycle, the full life cycle of fuel, and each step of making cooking fuel has impacts as well. And what this does is it includes all steps of the process of converting a raw material to a usable cooking. You look at things like feedstock production, which includes all stages from the extraction or acquisition of the feedstock from nature, all the way through production into a form that's ready for the processing step. It includes the processing step, which is basically the steps needed to convert the fuel feedstock into a usable cooking fuel. It includes the distribution step, which covers the transportation of the fuel to the processing location and then to the consumer. And then it includes the use step, which is basically comprised of all the steps associated with the combustion of the fuel in a cook stove and taking into account different stove efficiencies. But what it also does is take into account a number of the different inputs that are applicable to the cook stove sector. So it takes into account things like the renewability of the wood that's going into converting the feedstock into a final product. It takes into account the agricultural cultivation process. In the case of something like LPG, it takes into account the extraction of the crude oil from the ground before it's converted to the byproduct of LPG. It takes into account things like the energy used for the machinery that's used during the production process and the water used for those processes as well. At the distribution phase, it also takes into account energy inputs that are needed for transport and production to the retail location. And at the use phase, it takes into account different stove efficiencies to get a better perspective on what the combustion profile of that fuel will be like. And as a result, both from a cumulative perspective as well as a step-by-step perspective, it also gives you quantitatively the values of the outputs, both to air, land, and water for each step of the process. And what we did for this analysis is not only look quantitatively at the environmental impacts of these different cook stove fuels and fuel pathways, but what it also did was qualitatively look at some economic and social considerations. Because as we know, we can't just look at one aspect of things. Things like fuel costs, as well as livelihood and gender considerations are very important to consider when looking at different options to make more informed decisions about. So this is just a snapshot of the scope of this particular project. What we looked at was 11 different fuel types and 18 different fuel pathways. So 8 primary fuel types, but looking at different feedstock inputs, which totaled to 18 different full fuel pathways. So that's the column that you see on the left. What we also did specifically for the life cycle analysis was look at this set of environmental indicators. So for each of the Alliance's 8 focus countries that are listed there at the bottom, we looked at every indicator for every fuel type for each of those 8 countries. And then what we also did was look at these social and these economic factors from a qualitative standpoint. So what this resulted in was a few different resources that I'm going to go over. The first was a report titled Comparative Analysis of Fuels for Cooking. life cycle environmental impacts, and economic social considerations, as well as a complementary online tool that we'll refer to as FACIT, which stands for Fuel Analysis, Comparison, and Integration Tool. These products are meant to be used together. The tool is really a visualization of the results that are outlined in the report, and both should definitely be used together to complement each other in terms of viewing the results and being able to make informed decisions. And then what we also developed was a supplementary web tutorial for first-time users of FACIT that really walks you through the steps of using the tool and the report to find the information that you need to be able to incorporate it into your work. So I just want to take maybe a minute to walk you through the process on the website so that you can see where it's located as well as how to access it. So the FACIT tool can be accessed at cleancookthose.org/FACIT. And what it allows you to do is essentially change different parameters of interest. So say, for example, you were a stakeholder either from India or interested in engaging in the physical sector in India. You select the country, you go to the next tab, and you can select your fuels of interest. And all of the fuels that I showed on that previous slide are located. And so you can select a range of different fuels that you want to look at either individually or be able to compare. I'm going to select most of the fuels. And then you go to the View Results tab, and you'll see the different categories of results that I mentioned. So you look at environmental, look at economic, social. But what I want to primarily focus on right now is the environmental results, which is really the most robust. So you take, for example, something India, and if you're interested in looking at a specific type of indicator, so for example, global climate change potential, click on Create Chart, and it basically shows you the cumulative environmental impact for each of these fuels. And what you can also do is isolate each phase of each fuel type by clicking the dots under the legend. So you can better understand what effect each process of the production phase has on the fuel. And so what this tells us, for example, for global climate change, is that things that we knew already are things like coal has a very large effect on the environment, and things like LPG, even though it's a fossil fuel, can actually have less impacts than some biomass that are often traditional. What this also shows is that something like charcoal briquettes has a number of notable impacts during the processes, which is likely from the process of carbonization. So what this does is just allow you to better visually compare the different trade-offs of different fuel options, and then be able to supplement that visualization with the results from the resources that were developed. So if you go to the FACIT Resources tab, you can see that we have an executive summary, a full report, including the full detailed analysis, the full details about the scope and methodology that was used for this entire project, as well as a robust list of over 200 presentations. And then also a list to the other resources that I mentioned, such as the online tutorial. I'll just quickly show you the executive summary, which just gives you a good overview of the primary results and trends that you see as a result of the analysis. And I think what will be particularly useful to folks on the phone is Table 1.2, that really shows you overall trends across countries and across fuel types by them. So going back to the presentation. some technical difficulties. So I'll just quickly wrap it up with just some of the key observations and trends that came out as a result of this analysis. So if you look at the production process, you can see what was noted as part of the results was that things like fertilizer for agricultural production can lead to things like freshwater deposits and oxygen depletion. Renewable biomass is a very important factor as it really has a large effect on emissions. For example, non-renewable biomass versus something like renewable bamboo, which is carbon neutral. During the processing phase, some of the key observations that we noted was that the carbonization process, as shown in the example that I pulled up, is a major contributor to high environmental impact. And there's also notable higher impacts for fuels that require a lot of upstream processing steps. For example, sugarcane for ethanol requires a lot of processing up front, which contributes to higher impact for that particular type of fuel. For distribution, you'll note that, and what you'll see from the results is that long transport distances often contribute to greater GHG emissions. So you'll see that if you were to look at the results for China, because you have to travel further distances to transport the fuel, you'll often see larger impacts during the distribution. And then for something like use, higher efficiency stoves actually have quite a large impact on the overall cumulative environmental impact because higher efficiency stoves convert more of the fuel's energy content into useful cooking energy, and therefore it reduces the impact of the space. And then something that we also learned as part of this analysis is that while electricity is seen at the point of use, there are impacts that are significant that result from the source of electricity, coal or hydropower. So these results are really meant to be used for a variety of different audiences. So policymakers can use the results of FACIT and the report to develop policies regarding material use, resource conservation, and reduction of environmental impact. Donors and investors can use this information to make more informed choices about different investments and projects they want to pursue. Enterprises can really use this information to improve and optimize their decisions and their products and processes, as well as improve the overall sustainability of their business models. Researchers can really use more of the detailed information to identify data gaps and therefore find opportunities to improve fuel technology performance. And then this effort was also a priority for the Alliance to help us inform, guide, and prioritize our future activities and interventions. One quick thing that I wanted to mention is that while this analysis was done at the country level, we also work with different fuel enterprises that are part of our grant pipeline to provide them with capacity building using life cycle analysis tools. And what this is enabling them to do is give them a more rigorous analysis of their fuel supply chain and give them a stronger value proposition. And we've had a number of our enterprises be able to use this to strengthen their discussions with donors and investors, as well as consumers, to give additional value to the environmental value proposition. And it gives them concrete recommendations on how to improve their processes and outputs, which not only helps them from an environmental standpoint, but also helps them reduce their overall costs. And what we'll be doing is, as we are working with a few different companies right now to do this same type of analysis, we will be developing a guide that can be used as a framework for other fuel enterprises to do the same type of analysis, so they too can have a stronger perspective and a prioritization tool for their own project. Just wrapping up, so some of the key takeaways of this overall effort is really that combustion is just one piece of the whole picture. And so what we can continue to do research on stove efficiency and combustion of the fuel in the stove, but what this does is just offer an additional layer of information to make more informed decisions and have more perspective on the overall impact of food. And what it does is give that additional layer of impact to consider from both an economic, social, and health perspective. And what it also shows is that these this type of analysis can be done not only at the country level, but at the enterprise level. And while results can't be necessarily compared between countries because every country has different data inputs and therefore results, but what you can see in the results is that there are general trends by type, and so that can also to make fuel options. And every fuel option, no matter which one that we look at, has trade-offs. So where you see a high number or a low number, what that's really showing is not that one is bad or one is good, but what it's showing is that there are opportunities for improvement, no matter what fuel option is best. And then when it, finally, what it also says is that if inefficiencies, as I mentioned, and poor impacts are really an opportunity for the way to improve. Another main goal of this entire effort was not only to derive results, but to show where the gaps are so that we can direct further research as well as work with the sector to help address some of the gaps and look for opportunities. So this is just a snapshot of some of the gaps that we identified as a result of undertaking this work, and they're across all of the three categories that we focused on. So there's still future opportunities to continue this work through the additional phases, and we'll be looking to our partners and the sector to help us fill some of the gaps going forward. So this webinar, as Kavanaugh mentioned, will be recorded. So please do feel free to share this recording with your colleagues to help amplify the results as much as possible. We'll be holding a series of targeted group webinars as well for people and our stakeholders that are interested in learning a little bit more and diving into deeper into the results. We'll be developing some communication materials such as an infographic and posting to our social media platforms to share the results more broadly. And then we'll be holding a few series of events that will not only be piggybacking off of other events that the Alliance will be holding, but events that will really be dedicated to rolling out these different fuel-specific resources to our students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Thornlow from the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as our colleagues Molly Rogers and Sarah Cashman from Eastern Research, which is the organization that performs both the analysis for the Global Alliance as well as the analysis for the U.S. Environmental Protection. And they're going to be able to highlight a lot of the synergies from both the EPA report and the Global Alliance report that were done simultaneously and done in complementary fashion. So thank you for your time, and I'm not sure if that's
all right. Thank you so much, Seema.
Maybe I'll answer one or two quick questions, and then at the end of the EPA presentation, we'll have time for a broader set of questions and discussion. Okay. Well, it seems like they're either you're deep in thought thinking about the kind of questions that you want to ask, or we'll wait till the end. It doesn't seem like there's any quick questions I can answer right now, so I will go ahead and turn things over to Susan.
All right. Thank you so much, Seema. Well, what I'm going to do is describe the work that we've done in two phases. The first phase is the information that's being used in the work that Seema just provided an overview, and then I'm going to show what we're trying to do in developing a tool.
All guests have been unmuted.
That will help you better understand and access the data.
I can't hear you at the moment. Maybe you're muted.
I'm not on mute. Hey, Molly, go ahead and step in.
It seems that everybody has been unmuted.
All guests have been muted.
Molly or Sarah, are you able to, we just unmuted you. Could you just test the volume, make sure you're coming through?
Yes, we're fine. I think what happened was everyone was unmuted rather than just Susan, who, if you can just unmute the 919-541 participant number to speak at the bottom of the participant list.
So we'll just take a minute or two to address the technical issues, and then we'll continue.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Can you hear me? Excellent. All right, are we ready to get going? Molly, can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, I can. Just
Okay.
waiting for the green light from the Alliance.
Okay.
Seema, you all are on mute if you're trying to give us the go-ahead to keep going.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get going if everyone can hear me. Is that a thumbs up? All right, that sounds good. Thank you very much. Well, the purpose of our part of this presentation this morning is to cover the current status of the work that we've done to do a fuel life cycle assessment at the US EPA, and I represent the Office of Research and Development. And we're going to discuss the capabilities of the current phase of this research that builds upon the LCA work that we did under the work for phase 1 that's used in FACIT. And then we're going to describe how we want to provide easier access to that information that's dynamic, and you can play around with different parameters that may affect your fuel and stove choices. And so we'll be, both Molly and Sarah are going to be participating in this presentation with me. So phase 1 was the LCA study, and what Seema just presented. There was a link to the publication. It was published in April of last year. It provides the data for India and China, looking across different types of fuels, different types of stoves, and that, as I said, is included in the Alliance report. And then what we're working on currently is doing a much more in-depth analysis of that data where we normalize it, and Sarah's going to talk more about that. And currently the report is going through QA and peer review, and we've expanded the analytical scope for the technical audience. And there were several really good questions or comments we got from phase 1 that we've addressed within this report. And as I said, what we're really excited about is the potential for a web-based tool that can interact with this data and allow you to look at a more scenario-based analysis based on changes in fuels or changes in stoves. All right, thank you, Sarah or Molly.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Susan. So a few of the benefits of the EPA LCA tool, and I should mention my name is Sarah Cashman. I'm a contractor supporting EPA in this LCA work and also supported the Alliance in development of FACIT, is that the EPA LCA tool and our research reports are targeted at a more sort of technical scientific audience, and really kind of digging into a number of the parameters driving the results. And one of the main differences between the FACIT work and the EPA work is that the EPA work is targeted at analysis of changes resulting from national cooking fuel mixes. So rather than comparing single fuels, for instance, we're looking at differences associated with the mix of cooking fuels and associated stove technologies for the covered countries. In our current EPA Phase 2 results, we have expanded the scope to include 4 of the 8 alliance countries, China, India, Ghana, and Kenya. This chart shows the cooking fuels we assessed for each of the countries covered. The orange highlighted cells display country and fuel combinations investigated in the EPA work that are not covered in FACIT. These include kerosene and electricity for Ghana and Kenya, as well as biogas for China and piped natural gas for India. During the original Alliance and EPA work, we did find that stove technology and efficiency were large drivers in overall cooking fuel environmental impacts. Therefore, in the Phase 2 EPA LCA, we expanded the range of stove types and efficiencies assessed for each fuel type within the covered countries. We also expanded the projected cooking fuel mix scenarios we looked at and electrical grid mix potential changes in this phase of work. Where relevant, we have included updated sources for stove emissions from the latest research as well. As I mentioned, one of the main differences between the Alliance work and the EPA work is the focus in the EPA work on assessing overall environmental impacts of cooking fuel mixes. We compare projected or potential changes in national cooking fuel mix environmental impacts to the current baseline to understand the relative change related to each potential improvement strategy. For instance, we may look at various projected scenarios that replace traditional fuels with modern fuels. We have also incorporated the ability to assess environmental impacts from changes in stove technology and electrical grid mix within the national cooking fuel mix. In our Phase 2 work, we have expanded the sensitivity analyses to understand the possible range in overall LCA findings resulting from various modeling assumptions such as calculation methods to determine the level of non-renewable forestry per country or the way to allocate burdens for fuel systems with multiple product outputs. Here is an example of a chart to display the type of information you may get from the EPA study results. So this graph shows the global climate change potential here and the particulate matter formation potential here for a couple example scenarios in Ghana. The first bar in each of the categories shows your baseline mix. So for instance, you can see that firewood, charcoal, and LPG contribute primarily to the global warming potential in Ghana, whereas firewood and charcoal are dominating the baseline impacts for particulate matter formation. The next set of bars here shows a couple example projected scenarios if we make some changes to the fuel mix only. So for instance, the moderated growth shows close to business as usual for 2030, but there's a bit of a slowdown in the growth of LPG. So LPG still increases, but at a slower rate than in previous years and primarily replaces firewood. And then another example scenario, and we looked at a number, and these are just two, is a diverse modern fuel scenario in which we replace firewood and charcoal with a number of modern fuel options. So you can see here that you can gain some possible benefits, particularly in particulate matter formation with replacing the fuel type only. The next set of bars layers on top of those results, changing the fuel mix, but also improving the stove technology and the efficiency. So you can see by both of these strategies, you're able to gain some reductions in both global climate change potential and specifically particulate matter formation potential with both changes to the fuel mix as well as the stove technology. A little bit more on our study results. We collected many data points in this Phase 2 work for EPA for each fuel pathway and stove type, and also different stages along the life cycle, such as many data points for different kiln emissions and agricultural operations associated with our crop residues. Because we collected many data points, we conducted Monte Carlo uncertainty analysis in this phase of EPA work. This allowed us to quantify the realistic variability in environmental results for LCA models and present our results as a range rather than a static data point. We also developed a different view of results called normalized results in the Phase 2 work. Normalization compares cooking sector impacts to national estimates of characterized environmental impact in each country. This provides an indication of the relative contribution that the cooking sector makes to the environmental impacts across the assessed categories of the country of focus. For instance, our draft results indicate that particulate matter formation and black carbon and short-lived climate pollutants disproportionately contribute to national level impacts for those categories, whereas the cooking sector may not be the driving sector for other impact categories we assessed. So it gives you a high-level overview of where you may want to focus some of your efforts for the cooking sector. I'll now turn it over to Molly, who will discuss our proposed tool.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Molly Rogers, and I'm with Eastern Research Group, a contractor supporting EPA and having supported previously the work for the Alliance. As Susan mentioned at the beginning of our talk, there are plans for EPA to develop an LCA tool, and it's really geared to being able to evaluate and explore various scenarios. So, if you will, conducting some what-if analyses to get at a more granular level of the data and understanding what's driving the impacts and assessing potential different options with respect to the fuel mix for different countries to see and compare what compositions could potentially gain more benefits. There's several primary functions that are planned for the tool. The first is to compare fuels, generally either looking at the single fuel comparative view or looking at the fuel mixes in comparison. And then really where the heart of the tool is in this customized analyses area, and I'll get into some details about that when I show a draft mock-up of what we have planned. The third primary feature is explore data, and this is important as well because it will provide access to all of the pre-generated study results. As Sarah mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of data that were generated through these efforts, not all of which can be explained in a narrative report. And so providing access to the electronic version of all of that underlying data can be very valuable, as well as providing the background life cycle inventory data that was used in supporting the modeling efforts, as well as additional reference data that supported the modeling assumptions and choices. And so the thinking there is that some of these underlying data may be valuable for extending efforts and other research and providing access to that information so folks can leverage all of the valuable work that was done and supported by EPA will be a nice addition to the sector. The other difference and value provided within the EPA tool is allowing users to control how they view the results. So like FACIT, comparing single results will be an option, but as I mentioned, you'll be able to look at fuel mixes as well. And not only looking at the life cycle stage, which is, to determine which set of the phase is contributing most to the impacts, but also looking at this normalized view. So these next two slides, I'm going to share a few of the draft mock-ups. This is sort of the vision, if you will, for the home screen for the EPA tool. And again, this is covering the countries India, China, Kenya, and Ghana, where you have three primary paths that you can enter to explore the inner workings of the tool. In the customized analyses section, you'll see here that there are quite a few options for users to explore the data further. And what we're getting into is an important feature is allowing the user to define a custom fuel mix. So the baseline fuel mix for the country selected is presented by way of reference. However, if you're wanting to explore potential options for modifying the composition of the fuel mix for a particular country to then assess, well, how would decreasing one particular fuel type and upping another potentially more modern clean fuel, how does that impact the results? What are the benefits that could be gained from an environmental perspective in adjusting that fuel composition? So that's one element of allowing you to create your custom fuel mix that you'll then be able to view the results dynamically on charts and side by side in addition to the pre-generated study results that were part of the effort. Two other important areas are allowing users to specify the methodology in which the results are derived. So controlling the allocation method and also setting the forced renewability factor, either a high estimate of renewability or a low estimate of renewability, and seeing what the impact on making those choices can be in your results. Lastly, a set of key parameters that we found to be significant drivers in the results, allowing the users to customize and evaluate changes in stove efficiency, the stove technology, as well as the electricity grid. What's the composition of the grid that you're selecting, and how does that influence your results? In terms of results view, again, you can make the choice between normalized results or cooking fuel mix results when you're looking at these more detailed scenario-based analyses. And users will also be able to include in their results display some of the predefined scenarios that we've included as part of the study just as a point of reference. So in comparing the benefits of both of these tools, there are some common overlaps between the two, and that's primarily in the space of looking at the single fuel static environmental LCA results. But as Seema mentioned, FACIT also offers kind of the other important part of the conversation in terms of evaluating the economic indicators as well as the social indicators in the context of the overall discussion. And as I mentioned, with the EPA tool, it's primarily targeted toward more advanced users or LCA practitioners that really want to get into the inner workings of the results and have a better or deeper understanding of what's driving some of the impacts. And so it allows you to investigate what some of those drivers are and then how changes to those can then impact the results that you're seeing. And importantly, looking at fuel mixes, because as we all know, the composition of a collective fuel mix is important to assess collectively, and how policy decisions related to promoting certain fuel composition mixes for a particular country could really drive benefits. I think another important difference is the dynamic nature that's planned for the EPA tool, whereby your results based on the selections that you made will be dynamically recalculated and rerun and shown in real time based on the choices that you're making with respect to stove efficiencies or technology choices, so that you can really understand how, the importance of efficiencies or the technologies that are used, and get at some of, like for the example that Sarah gave, to see if you're just promoting differences in fuels, what benefits might you see, but if you also add the combination of fuels and stove technology together, then what additional benefits can be realized. And again, the normalization of the results to kind of have this higher level view of the overall contribution of impacts to the sector as a whole. And just a couple additional points to make about the comparison between the two tools and the value provided. Just to note that the EPA data set covers 4 of the 8 Alliance fuel focused countries. Sarah mentioned the additional fuels that were added in the Phase 2 study for the EPA work. Another element that's planned for the data made available through the EPA tool is to offer them via web services. And for any folks out there that are kind of data savvy, the intention behind this is while it's valuable to use through this tool, there's a lot of reference data and other supporting data that were generated as part of this effort that may be valuable to use for other research and potentially other applications. And by making the data available in this format, it just extends its value and applicability potential in the future. And then we're also looking for direct opportunities to relate the two tools. So for FACIT, identifying for its users that the EPA tool exists and could be a valuable resource to look at more advanced LCA analyses. And then again, in the same theme within the EPA tool, making sure that its users are aware of FACIT to access the economic and social data that are available, as well as the other Alliance resources that are available within their site. So that kind of gives a high-level snapshot of the plans for the tool. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Susan to wrap up next steps from EPA's perspective.
All right. Thank you, Molly. Well, just to summarize, we'll have the final report for our Phase 2 study coming available in late 2017, hopefully maybe even this summer. It's speeding along through the review process. And then we'll continue the development of the LCA tool, and we hope to get coverage of the same countries that are currently in FACIT, but obviously, you know, we've got to see how that lines up with other parties. And we anticipate an initial version available in the fall of 2017. And if you have any questions or comments, and I see that we've already gotten a good question about stove efficiency. Thank you for that. We'll answer that in a minute. But if you have any further questions that we don't answer today, just send me an email or call me, and I'll be glad to respond. Thank you so much for your attention this morning. Molly, do you want to take the question about how stove efficiency is defined, or Sarah, is that your preference?
Sure, I can take that question. Based on sort of trying to collect as much information as possible, we incorporated results from both field testing and laboratory testing. And this helped us to sort of define some of our ranges in our stove emissions. So, for instance, you know, our minimum and maximum values in our uncertainty analysis. So it covered both, and you'll also see within the FACIT report, there will be specific sources listed in the appendices for all of the sources for the stove emission profiles as well.
Other questions?
So for now, it doesn't look like there are any other additional questions. Okay, it looks like one just came through. Is the efficiency of stoves and efficiency of fuel correlated? How do we identify? Sarah, would that be something that you might be able to answer?
To some extent. So something that Seema mentioned is that if you have a higher stove efficiency, then you're requiring less overall fuel to be produced because you're getting more energy out of less fuel. So that in turn can result in lower upstream life cycle impacts associated with the feedstock production and fuel processing and transporting, if that addresses your question.
And I mean, our point is what we're showing is the interconnectedness between, you know, efficiency and how much fuel you need. And so it's just important. And that's why we like this dynamic analysis that allows you to look at these parameters on a scenario basis to better understand how the LCA environmental trade-offs compare, as well as the information you get through FACIT on the societal and economic aspects.
Great, thanks for that. Let's maybe give it 30 seconds and see if any additional questions also come through. So with the contact information that's listed on the slide right now, you can feel free to email anybody listed on this slide, and we can answer any additional questions that might come after this presentation. What we'll also do is be sending around the presentation. I know that we had some technical difficulty with some people not being able to access the presentation when they logged into the webinar, so we'll be able to distribute the slides as well. And then, of course, the webinar was recorded, so any additional information or if you missed a portion of the presentation, you'll be able to view it in its entirety. So, yeah, I think that there aren't any more questions, so maybe I'll turn it over to Kavanaugh to wrap things up.
I think Seema gave a very good summary of some of our next steps through this webinar and accessing information. On behalf of the Alliance and our presenters, Molly, Sarah, and Susan, thank you to everyone for participating in this webinar. And also, the Alliance would like to thank our EPA colleagues, Molly, Sarah, and Susan, for a terrific presentation and your willingness to share this very interesting information with our partnership. We will be sharing the presentation again soon. And if you have any further questions, please contact the Alliance. Thank you again, and have a great day.